Welcome to the She Wins podcast. I am your host, Alisa Devine, award-winning and best-selling author. When one woman tells her story, it inspires more women to do the same. Domestic violence thrives in secrecy. So to eliminate it, we tell our stories, we open the conversations, and we identify changes to be made. And that is what we are doing here today. Courtney Peterson, welcome. I'm so excited to get to talk with you today. Courtney has shared her story in hashtag She Wins Too. And she is also going to be speaking at the She Wins retreat in the Orlando area the weekend of October 15th, 2021. Courtney, welcome.
Alisa, thank you so much for having me. I'm so glad I get to talk to you like this.
I am too. And I just really love your message. And I love how you've turned your story into something that helps other women share her stories too through Speak Cosmetics. So I definitely want to get into that. And what I want to start with today, though, is you were married to a police officer at the time. And I want to bring that up and talk about that because, we think that police officers, are safe people. That, that's not something that someone that we would expect to hurt us. And so tell me a little bit about when your relationship started, and you also, because I know you do touch base on that in your story, and tell us a little bit about how that was hard to separate and hard to decipher.
Yeah, no, I think that is definitely an important part of my story that I want to speak to. Initially, when we first met, we met online on a dating site. And when we first met, I knew he was a police officer, and it wasn't something that I was initially like, oh, I'm more attracted to him because it's a man in uniform. That was never the initial attraction for me. However, the second date that we had, I actually went on a ride along with him and was in the car and spent hours with him, while he's doing his job. And there definitely was, I could see how a lot of women have that attraction in the sense of somebody in this uniform having a really confident demeanor about themselves. And, they do have power and authority that a lot of people don't.
Right.
And, I think back on when you are a police officer and what you are sworn to do as a duty to your community, you swear an oath to protect others. And, that was always something that it was hard for me to reconcile because he swore an oath to protect his community, but couldn't protect his own wife and didn't.
Yes.
And the crazy thing is he came home a few times, and actually, I'm sure this was against rules, but he allowed me to listen to recorded calls that he had to make, that he had on his phone.
Oh, wow.
So if he just went to a call, and two of them were domestic violence incidences. Okay. And he had me actually listen to them and, was just like appalled. He was appalled. And I just found that interesting that, initially, and that was before anything physical had ever happened. But it was, he just was always so like, I would never do that to you. I can't believe these men do this to the women that they say that they love.
Well, that's really sparking my interest because, that's surprising. I mean, so it's almost like, do you think that there was any intention that he had behind that? Because it's almost like he was setting you up beforehand to make you think that
plant these seeds.
Yeah.
No,
Like,
I
can you think you're crazy?
100% agree with you, Alisa. I think there were a lot of things that he did calculated that I don't think that I obviously recognized until much later. And I think there are things that he started to even ask me questions about and then use later to say, well, we talked about that, or, and completely turn it around to make it seem like, no, that's not what I asked. That's not what I said. You've misinterpreted, or, you went about that the wrong way. But no, you're right. I think that was a very calculated way to try and make me feel safe.
Yes.
And, and it wasn't. And one other thing, I did find his book of the calls that Stacy, his ex, had made on him. There was an entire case book of all of the calls.
Really?
And probably, I don't know if it was 6-9 months into our relationship when I found it and read through it. And he was so mad when I found it. But at the same time, there was this like, okay, you were never actually arrested. You never went to jail and you never were prosecuted. And you're a police officer. And so she must have been the one that was in the wrong. Like that's how warped it
Right.
was all thinking.
Right. And I want to state that that you became close friends with Stacy, and Stacy was his first wife.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until after, though, after you had left the relationship or you had reported the incidences where he was abusive, that the two of you were able to connect, which I
Right.
think is just so much. I mean, that's another, book in and of itself. I think that it's so significant that you and Stacy were able to develop a relationship and to feel comfortable reaching out and connecting with each other, because I know personally that it is so validating to have someone else who has walked in your shoes to be able to say, no, you weren't crazy. Like, this is not something that was in your head, this was real. Can you tell me a little bit more about that, Courtney?
Yeah. I think that was, there were several things in my healing and the story behind my healing in itself, but obviously Stacy was a big part of that, because exactly to your point, talking with her and allowing there to be this, oh my gosh, that's exactly what you said to me. And she would share a similar story. And it was, very different, but very similar in what he had said and the ways that he had done things and how he would make us feel. And just, we bonded on, of course, on a level that's kind of unexplainable, that no one else could really understand.
Right,
And
right.
I think it's definitely cemented our own unique relationship, but it really helped me feel sane. It really helped me feel grounded. And I feel like she helped center my spirit, and she was such a tremendous source of hope for me at the time.
I love that. I love that. And so, you know, I think it's so incredible that the two of you, still have a relationship together. And then, but what would you say to other women who don't have that, that opportunity? Because there are so many women who don't, and how do they still, feel validated within themselves to know that, you know, to like be able to heal from that and to be able to move on from that without thinking it was something about them? Because so often women in abusive relationships, they do blame themselves and they do think, well, maybe if I could have been better, or if I would have communicated differently, or this or that, then it wouldn't have happened.
And yeah, of course, I initially had all of those same thoughts. And the one thing I would recommend to those experiencing abuse or currently in a situation where they feel is abusive, the crisis centers that are out there, the one that helped me, Hope Alliance specifically, they also helped create community. There was a victims advocate lawyer that I worked with, as well as a counselor. And everything that I shared with them, they completely helped validate and understand and knew where I was coming from and knew how to help me, place one foot in front of the other. Something that I didn't do, and I didn't do it because my friends wrapped around me so embraced me in a way that they never had in my entire life.
Wow.
And not to say that they weren't good friends before, they were,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
of course, I was isolated from them for a period of time because that's what happens.
right,
And typically, if you don't have community, that's why a lot of times you continue to stay.
right,
So the crisis center, they had meetings once a week, and they had women come together, and they have a facilitator in those meetings to help the conversation, but also help give some guidance. But I think hearing the stories from others is so helpful, and that is why I chose Speak as a platform to really get those stories out there, because that's what helps resonate to like, oh, okay, I'm not crazy. That's exactly what I've heard. That's exactly what I'm going through. That's exactly what I'm feeling. And while it's, everybody's living their own unique circumstance, those stories help create a sense of hope and
yes.
community.
Absolutely. I love that. And that's what, I intend for hashtag She Wins too, to do when that book is released as well, is to share that message of hope and, inspiration that it can be better afterwards, after leaving and rebuilding your life.
And you've known that. And that's why I loved connecting with you initially, and hearing that you had done the first one and reading those stories and continuing that conversation. I think it's so powerful to continue and never lose sight of those stories, and people just feeling more empowered to not feel silenced, and they
Right,
can speak up. Yeah.
right. Right. Now, I want to touch base on something that keeps coming into my mind as we're talking, and that is, those really subtle comments, that I know that happened in the beginning of your relationship, and one that I'm thinking of is when you, on a date, when you wore the hippie headband.
Yeah.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about that and how that was so subtle, yet you knew that it was
Yeah.
a red flag?
It's so funny when you look back, and I'm sure you think of similar stories too. Most women I've talked to have those moments where they're like, "Oh, something in my gut just didn't feel right." But yeah, I had a headband that went around my forehead, and it was like little Swarovski crystal leather headband, and I felt confident in it. I know I rocked it.
Hmm.
I remember it was our first date, and we sat down, and I don't know if it was in the beginning. It was like beginning toward maybe the middle of our date, and he, without even asking, took it off my head and said, "You look so much better without that. Why would you wear that?" And it was like so shocking, but at the same time he kind of laughed it off. But I knew in my heart that, like, okay, that was weird. Why
Hmm.
did he do that? And
Right,
it was one of those things that was, I think, him testing the waters to
right.
see how I would respond and
Hmm.
how I'd react to that. And I reacted probably the way he wanted me to. I didn't say anything. I didn't say like, "No, I'm gonna put it back on. I'm gonna rock it." I
Right,
just let him take it off, and he's like, "Look, you're so beautiful. Why do you need to cover your hair like that? Your hair looks so much better without it." It
right.
was just, it's icky.
Yeah, like proving his dominance or something
Yes.
of that sort to, set something up in his favor that way.
exactly. And just kind of see, all right, I'm going to play this and see how she reacts and see if she lets me do this and see how much I can control the situation.
Right. Right. Okay. So, Courtney, what was like the breaking point for you when you knew that you had to change something or, your life was on the line? What did you do? And because of your safety as well, I mean, being married to a police officer, we know that maybe it was hard for people to believe you
Right.
and your, cries for help. So tell us how, you got to that point and how you were able to get through it.
I think it's a accumulation of a few things. After he was arrested and there was a restraining order put into place, most of the time, most people don't adhere to it. We didn't. We did see each other. However, he could not come onto the property just because he knew, as a police officer at the time, he's like, I'm going to lose. I can't even go through beautification if I break the restraining order, if they see me at my place. So he had a trailer that he went and stayed at and parked, like an RV trailer. And I stayed with him there. And
And so at that point where he was arrested, though, he really hurt you.
yeah, yeah.
And so how did that come about? And then how did you end up going to stay with him in the trailer?
Right. I
Give
think
us a little bit of information on that, because I think that it's really important to point out how many times women do go back before they finally have had enough.
right. Do you want me to talk about the story of what actually took place before his arrest, or do you want me to just talk
Yeah, why
about?
don't you tell us a little bit about that, about
Yeah,
what led to the arrest, and then how he was able to be arrested.
sure. And it's so funny. That day, it was April 16th of 2016. I remember everything about that day, like from the minute I woke up to where I was that day to accounts that I visited for my work. But he had started messaging me that morning about, would you ever cheat on me? Should I believe you? Um, by the way, I know where you are, and just crazy stuff.
Where was that coming from? Why was he doing that, do you think?
So he was trying to, and I was like, no, what are you talking about? And he's like, would you ever have any reason to reach out to your ex-husband, to Kevin, to somebody I was married to and gotten divorced from a long time before we even met, like 8 years in between. And I said no. And so he sent me a screenshot of a Facebook message that I had messaged my ex-husband about our previous mortgage, that I was still getting calls. I was like, hey, so-and-so company is still calling me, blah, 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 blah. Can you let me know or clue me in? And that was the extent. And it was a screenshot from my ex-husband's current girlfriend at the time. So her and him were communicating, and she shared with Shane at the time what had happened, thinking that there was something, or trying to create some story that wasn't there.
Wow.
And so he sent me that, and I was like, okay, well, you see the message, you know what it was about. And he was like, no, you lied to me. You lied and said you haven't had any communication. So it was just this deep. And I was like, to be honest with you, like, I thought it was so small. If I would have even said, hey, I've got to message him and ask him about this and see why these are calling, it would have created so much more drama than what needed to be done, exactly what's taking place.
Mm-hmm.
So there was this long, and then he was on duty at the time, and he said, oh, I know where you are. And he sent me a screenshot of my location. So we had a tracker on my phone, GPS tracker,
Okay.
which I didn't know about at the time. And so, stuff like this kind of always occurred, like
Right.
just drama all the time. It
Right.
was, if it wasn't one thing, it was another, a week of amazingness and then a week of just complete heart-wrenching, utter like fighting. So that's just kind of what I expected. I expected there to be a big fight when I got home, and I actually ordered a pizza. I remembered him walking in the door hours after duty was done. So I don't know where he had gone. I was like, hey, I got a pizza. And he didn't say anything. He walked right in, walked up to my iPad and broke it into, broke my work iPad.
Yes.
And I like shot up and I was like, what are you doing? And he's like, that's the device that you messaged him on. And I don't want to see that in front of me. And it was, one of, I don't know how many phones he had broken, 2 or 3 previously before that.
Okay.
And so I said, you want to know how it feels to have your work devices broken? So I ran into where he kept his police laptop, as if I was really going to do anything. It was a more reactive moment, and you were running into, seeming like I was going to break it. And I turned around like, no, I'm not going to break his computer. That's ridiculous. Turned around, and that's when he grabbed me from behind and put me in a chokehold and laid me over the bed. And I remember at the time looking at all of the pictures that were in front of me. I could probably draw them out exactly how we had the pictures of like my art and pictures of us on the dresser. And I remember looking at him and I was trying to scream and I couldn't breathe. And I was scratching the side of his arm to try to get it off of me. And I thought I was going to die. I remember thinking I'm going to die. And so, yeah, I woke up after I woke up on the floor. I had passed out for I don't know how long. And he was in the corner of the room at the time. And I remember the look. And Stacy and I both kind of talked about the look that he had after, he was very violent, whether it was a destructive of property or, obviously hurting us. There was a look in his eyes, which was just honestly pure evil. And it was a very scary, scary look. And I tried to run past him, ran into the bathroom, and he's like, see what you made me do. I was trying to protect you from yourself. You were going to hurt yourself with the gun. Like he was already trying to create the story of what happened. And I didn't even know he had a gun, that he had put his police gun next to the computer. So in his mind, he was creating a story about how I was going for the gun.
Wow.
And I was like, what are you talking about? And I was just getting more and more scared, ran out of the bathroom. He tried to grab my arm. I remember we kind of shuffled again, ran out the door. I was in my pajamas at the time. And there was 2 people out that were our neighbors that lived in the apartment complex that he was a security officer for. So he not only was a police officer, but we lived in an apartment community that he watched, and we got a discounted rate because of that. Okay. And they, saw me run out, and I was saying, please God, please God, please God. And they didn't say anything or ask me if I needed help. I ran to a pond that was kind of close by, and I think I probably must have been gone for about an hour. I did have my phone, and I texted him, please tell me why I shouldn't call the police. I bit through my lip. You choked me so hard, I bit through my lip. So my lip was bleeding. The inside of my mouth was bleeding.
Right.
Obviously, my neck hurt. And at that time, without me knowing, that's when he decided to call the police. So he actually called the police, and he created the story of how I was going for the gun. I think because he changed his story twice. Initially, I think he was saying that I was going to hurt myself. So that was what he initially started saying. Okay. And that he was trying to protect me, and I was out of control, and I was screaming, and I passed out because I was screaming so hard.
Oh, wow.
And so, yeah, I finally came back to the apartment, and I didn't see his truck when I walked back around. So I knew he was gone.
Yeah.
So I went back to the apartment. I deadbolt the locks. I remember not only locking the room, but putting a chair underneath the doorknob. And then I heard this loud pounding, and it was the police at the door. And so when I went to answer it, I was just kind of in shock. I thought the two neighbors that saw us were the ones who called the police.
Right, right.
And so when they came in and talked to me about what happened, I didn't really, I know I was not very forthcoming in talking. I didn't really say much.
And I
And
think
they
that's
were,
normal, that's a
yeah,
normal thing for sure.
yeah, I was really scared of him losing his job because he had always said that. Like, if anybody ever gets called, I won't have a job anymore.
And then it's like, it's almost like he's blaming you for it.
And he would say things like, and any deleted text that you have, like everything, all things we can alter and look at, and like just created this fear in my mind of any time I talked about calling the police, when we would fight and when he would become violent.
Okay.
And then I showed him the bed where it happened, and there was a like perfectly imprinted of my face, of my makeup, like my
Okay.
mascara, my foundation, like it looked like a face on the bed. And there
Oh,
was blood around the mouth of it. So me
right.
just sharing, I said, yes, he put me in a chokehold and I passed out on the floor. And so I did say that. I did share that.
Okay.
And they actually said, well, we have the text message from his phone. So they took his phone when they arrived. And I don't think he accounted for that. I don't know if
Right.
he thought about
You
that.
thought that that was going to happen.
Yeah. So that's when they decided to arrest him. And they said, well, we have enough evidence here to take him away. And they did. So that was what took place that day on April 16th. Um, and then afterward, me going back to him, I think, again, it was one of those, like, it was so shocking, but, I've heard other women share this, and I think it's really a good thing to share. Every time something would happen, it wasn't like the bad things happened initially. It was like one small bad thing, one bigger, one bigger, one bigger, one bigger. And it kind of just like was the spiral of, all right, well, okay, I'll forgive this one thing. It wasn't that bad. Well, I'll forgive this one thing because, it wasn't that much worse than what happened before. And it just kind of is this little
Progression.
progression of instances that occur. And at the time, I just thought, in that same mindset, I just felt like we could work through this. We could get through this. I don't want him to lose his job. Like, I remember thinking that was my number one concern, of just him losing his job. And
Yeah.
he just so cemented that in my mind of like, if anything happens, I'll lose my job. But
It also reminds me of the analogy, and actually, the doctor that wrote the foreword to She Rises, the book that I wrote with Kayla Hayes, he
yes,
mentions this analogy. It's almost like, if you take a frog and put it in boiling water, it's going to like jump out right away. But if you take a frog and you put it in the water and you heat the water, it gradually, doesn't realize the temperature increase. And so it stays there until it dies. And,
exactly.
that's just like, that is such a good analogy for the abuse, because it's like, can be very subtle sometimes, or just like, but like that progression, like you mentioned, well, it wasn't that bad, but then it gets a little worse, but then it gets a little worse after that. It's like that water heating up that you don't even realize.
And to be honest, Lisa, I think even at the time, I just felt like, well, maybe I was out of control. Maybe he was trying to protect me from hurting myself, which I wasn't even like, he put that in my mind. I didn't ever think that at all. And it
Right.
was just this weird, manipulation of, you were out of control. And I just was trying to gain some control of, I didn't know what you were capable of and what you were going to do. And so while it sounds crazy on the outside, when you're in it, he was still my husband and I loved him very much. And of course, I didn't want that bond of marriage to be broken or, thinking, okay, if he gets some therapy, if we both go to therapy, he already was going to therapy at the time, which is so funny.
Okay.
Because that's actually the breaking point of how I left. But I was thinking, if we could go to counseling together again, that would be helpful.
Right.
So yeah, I went back, I stayed with him for a while, and then we did go to a counseling appointment together.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
that was the last day that was my breaking point.
Right.
And he had gone to her, I don't know, for maybe a year. And I had found this counselor for him. And he would always say, well, I'm not going to talk about this. I'm going to ask my counselor about it. And he would hide information from me or, not communicate with me
Okay.
because he was going to talk to his counselor. So he kind of always used that. And so I sat down and I had written everything down just because I was so nervous about, talking. How do I start this conversation off? How do I share what's happening? How do I share the things that he's done and said, but still not become too emotional about it to where I felt like I was going to break down?
Yes.
And so I had written it all down and I read it
And I
to
want to
her.
say that that is so important. I think that you did that because I just want to reiterate how much, having that little bit of separation from, what from when you write something versus if you're, trying to think of it all and say it all in person, but just the act of writing, releases some of that emotion and you're able to detach from it. So that time you had from the time you sat down and wrote it out to the
Yeah.
time you were in the office, you were already able to detach some emotion from it. And I just want to point out how important that is because I remember reading that in your story, and I remember thinking how significant that was because it seems like it allowed you to say all the things
Yes.
without getting caught up in the emotion, which happens so often, and it can stop a woman from really, speaking for
Saying,
right.
yeah, I think I was so vulnerable at the time. I felt like I was going to fall apart at any second.
Yeah.
So I knew, I was just self-aware that, okay, I got to write this down. And I did. And I shared it with her. And she looked at me and said, well, first he said, you see what I have to deal with after I read everything. I
Wow.
was thinking at the time,
Like
did you
that.
not, yeah, just hear what I read about what happened and took place. And
Which is
this,
also interesting, I'm sorry for interrupting you, but I want to point this out because I think it's interesting that he still thinks that you're the problem.
yeah, I feel like he has deceived himself to
Right.
believing like it's too hard and too shameful for him to admit that he was in the wrong. And I think he
Right.
felt so ashamed that he just couldn't recognize it. Like
Yes.
he had to turn it around and put it on me.
Right.
And so he said that, and she said, well, do you feel like if you wouldn't have ran and acted like you were going to break his computer, that this would have all happened?
Wow.
And I just remember in that moment thinking, no, I did not do this. I did not do this. He
So
is the one who did this to me. And it wasn't my fault because I went to the computer for him to put me in a chokehold. That was not my fault.
can I ask you this, Courtney? Did you feel like the therapist was almost asking you in an accusatory way?
It was. It was a very uncomfortable, like, do you think if you would have responded differently that this would have happened from him, that he
And
would
then
have
like right
reacted in the
there.
way that he did? And it
Yeah.
was like that of hearing it from friends and, the voices that were already in my head of like, Courtney, he has created this own story and he's telling you like you are the cause and you are the reason. If you wouldn't have gone and done this, he wouldn't have done this. And I was thinking, no, this isn't right. This is so wrong. And I was so angry. I was so angry in that moment. And I
Right.
just left. I left. I drove to a friend's house that was really far away. It was about 45 minutes to an hour away. And I was done. I was done. And I knew he wasn't going to change. Something broke in me in that release of, no, this is not okay. You cannot treat me like this any longer. And for someone else to put it in a manner of like, well, Courtney, maybe it was your fault,
Yeah.
and that's what I felt like she was saying to me.
Right.
And that was what made me so angry.
I know, and I definitely, I can relate to that feeling, of anger. And yet at the same time, it was like also a beautiful moment because
Mhm.
you got that clarity.
Yes.
I
It
mean,
was
that
a
maybe,
very like curtains are open, like this
right,
is not okay. You
right,
need to leave.
right. And it's like so valuable at the same time, to have that. So,
I think he would have justified anything that he would have done in the future. He would have justified any sort of physical violence or, non-physical violence, which he always, of course, said he was sorry for, and he would admit he was wrong, but then would turn it back around, a week later. It was a completely different story.
yeah,
So I just knew that this was nothing that I could change.
right.
And it was up to me to change.
Well, I'm so happy that you were able to get the clarity, at that time, and you were able to, have the help of the people around you and your friends. And because look at what you've created now. Why don't you tell us a little bit about Speak and why you started that and what your vision is for it because it's so beautiful.
Thank you. I had worked in cosmetics for a very long time, for almost 17 years. And I always loved the conversation I would have with women as a makeup artist. People often talk about going to their hairdresser or going to their nail person and just kind of spilling the beans, because it's a
Right.
stranger and it's not somebody you're super close to. And strangers feel more comfortable to share information that you would not normally share with somebody you're close to, which is ironic. But I would have very deep conversations with so many women and get to learn about them and their stories. And I also, doing their makeup, would then, give them the mirror and they would see themselves in a way that maybe they hadn't ever seen before, and just felt so beautiful and felt confident. And it really, changed you could see their face change and light up, and, they walk a little differently and just kind of have a pep in their step afterward. And so I know that there's power in makeup, and there's power in stories. And
Absolutely.
thinking about just how I could use this public platform, because obviously I didn't share this earlier, but when he was arrested, since he was a police officer, it is public news. So it did go on the news, and it was shared in several different counties. And so people from all over saw it. And that's how so many people reached out to me. And it was a year later, exactly to the day. So it was April 16th of 2017 that I wrote a post. And I say the 16th because it was actually the nighttime that he got arrested, but the day, it was April 15th that it all happened.
Okay.
But yeah, the 15th is tax day. Anyways, a year later, I wrote what had happened to me, and I just shared my story on Facebook.
Okay.
And in response to me kind of sharing hey, this is kind of what I've been going through the past year. And so many women, I'm talking so many women that I am not even very close to, just maybe a lot of acquaintance people to reached out and shared their story with me and shared like, hey, I had something similar happen. Thank you so much for talking about it. I've never told anyone about it. I felt ashamed. And, just kind of hearing over and over and over of all these people come and share their story with me. I was blown away by the power of me speaking up and what that could do to help others at least say, I've never shared this, but I'm going to tell you because you shared your story. And I thought there's got to be a way to help encourage people to not only share, but start to heal from what they've encountered.
It's so powerful.
Thank you. I think about just how I came up with the idea. A girlfriend of mine had given me a necklace that had a girl's name on it. Her name was Anna, and it was from a company called A21, who works to rescue people from human trafficking. And it was Anna's story on a card. And so their idea was, hey, when you wear Anna's necklace around your neck, just remember where her story was and who she is and where she is now.
Yeah.
And so that's what gave me that idea of, oh my gosh, I could do this with makeup, and especially with starting with lipstick is, the power of speaking out and what it has done for me and other women that I've connected with. And so thinking about, okay, well, I'm going to create one. I'm going to create a lipstick to start out with, and I'm going to interview women and have them share their story with me and have that information inside the package. So again, kind of a similar thing. I asked everybody 3 questions. What was it that finally made you leave? What would you want other women to know? And what would you tell your younger self? And those are 3 things that I think, are hard to sum up in a very small amount of space, but it's so powerful. And you shared yours with me too. And I think it's just so encouraging to hear those stories. And then I put them in the box and I put them with resources to where they can receive help or get help. And then also what a healthy relationship should look like. So not just of the power wheel of here's what's happening, right, but what does a healthy relationship actually look like? And so I named all the colors after the women to be able to, once you put on the color, whether it's loud or power or bold or grace, whatever it might be, you think about that woman connected and tied to that story and sharing her story. So,
I love that. And I love everything that you have included in it. You sent me some of the lip colors, and, it has such a nice message, the paper that's included in the color, and the names of the lip colors are, so relevant too. And it's just, you have an amazing, incredible product. So
thank you.
You're welcome. I just would love to see that, in as many places as possible. So
me too. Yeah. I have come to a place in the business where I've had to slow down a little bit. But I just shared recently on my social media for Speak that, Speak is definitely evolving and changing, and there's more to come and more to the story. And I can't wait for what's to come in the future, and boutiques and salons and places that it'll be in the future.
Yes, I know. And of course you have a busy life right now with your husband and your 3 sons. And so that's an incredible accomplishment.
Thank you.
Well, so I'm just so grateful that we were able to find each other and connect through that photographer.
I've reached out to her and thanked her for saying your name and paving the way for, I'm sure she didn't. She's like, you need to talk to this woman. You need to talk to Alisa. I think you really have something you need to share. You're here's her information. So I went back and thanked her, and I'm so grateful for that.
Yes. Yeah, I love that. Just, just those little connections sometimes can make such a big impact. And look at, the ways we've
Absolutely.
been able to work together now.
I
So
know. I'm just so happy.
me too. Me too. And Courtney, it's been such a pleasure to get to talk with you today. And thank you so much for sharing and being vulnerable and, having these difficult conversations, because these are the things we want to open up for more women to do, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely on my heart to continue and talk and never feel so disassociated from my story that I can't connect to it, because I look back and think about that woman who was there in that story, and that was me. And it is sometimes hard to like, okay, that was me. I'm still her, just a healed version.
Right.
But yes, I hope that the message continues to grow. And I thank you so much for providing a platform for the book and what that will do. And I'm so excited for all the lives that we continue to touch based on you getting us all together. So thank you.
Well, it's been my honor. And you can read Courtney's short story and hashtag She Wins Too, which will be releasing at the end of August to the beginning of September 2021. So you can find that book on Amazon. Thank you, Courtney, so much.
Thank you, Alisa.
Thanks so much for participating in the hashtag She Wins conversation today. If you have questions you'd like me to answer on a future podcast, or if you're looking for advice, or if you're ready to tell your story, email info@alisadivine.com.